Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment, 3021, is our last chance to stop the freight train that is barreling towards Iowa workers right now. We finally arrived at the point of no return on this. We've reached a point where we can actually do something to improve the lives of Iowans rather than rushing through a process that takes away rights from working people in this state. This bill blows up a system that has been working for this state for 40 years. It's served us well for 4 decades. This is a system that was born out of a spirit of compromise. A Republican governor, Governor Robert Ray, celebrated his achievement in signing this statute. That legacy is long gone today. It's disappointing to see what is happening here as we see a Republican majority ready to gut a system that has served our state well, a system that has been born out of reason and compromise and continued to work with reason and compromise. In place, we are gutting it, and the reason, really unknown. But I'll tell you the compromise. We're compromising Iowa's future with this legislation. This fight means a lot to me. I was born to a union worker in a tire plant. His father, my grandfather, spent 2 days in a packing house as chief union steward. I personally have spent the last 11 years fighting for workers' rights in this state. I've seen the horrors of workplace exploitation myself. I've seen the results of unfair dismissals and how they shake up families' lives. I've seen the reality when the dangers of public employment result in serious and devastating injuries. These are real people being implicated by a real policy. And what we are doing is we are compromising their futures. I've stood up for wrongfully terminated workers and spent countless hours listening to what those workers say about how the loss of their livelihood has cost their families. And those workers have been fired without cause. Our current system allows them a redress for that. This bill compromises that Iowa value of rewarding a person's work with dignity and security of employment. I had hoped when I ran for the Iowa Senate that I would come here to expand workplace protections for Iowa's workers, that we would find ways to advance our economy by lifting workers up in this state. I campaigned on those ideas. I campaigned to stand up for working families who need an advocate in the Iowa Senate. And here I am advocating that we please don't gut a system that is a basic protection of their fundamental rights to earn a living. We need to make sure that the thousands of Iowans that are affected by this legislation know what it really means. We've heard a lot of discussion on this legislation. You're right, Senator Schultz. It's been from this side of the aisle. We have yet to hear a meaningful explanation of what this bill really does, line by line, to Iowa's working families. We're still listening. What we've raised are very clear concerns about the dangers it presents to our communities, about the concerns that it raises for those who want to serve their public. And yet we're told this is just a modernization of labor rights in our state. I've heard a lot from taxpayers about this proposal. There were quite a few out on the Capitol steps this past Sunday. Quite a few people came here to talk to us yesterday evening. They showed up at a public hearing, and they had quite a bit to say about what this means to them. They talked about what a fair process means to them in determining their wages, their health insurance. They talked about their fears of what this legislation will do. and not based on scare tactics. Their fears are real. Their fears mean something because this bill says, workers, do as you're told when it comes to health insurance. That's not hyperbole. Read the bill. The bill says talking about the insurance that affect your ability to provide for family members is an illegal topic for the employee organization to raise with its employer. That's what the bill does. But it doesn't stop there. It ties the hands of local government in a variety of ways. I know. I've talked to school board members. I've talked to county supervisors. I've talked to city council members. Their concerns are valid. They want to engage in an interactive process with their workers to make sure they have the best and most qualified people serving the citizens of their communities. Their concern, local control is being taken away from them. This bill has the legislature dictating to local governments what they can and cannot do in labor relations. That is not local control. There are concerns about the ability to bring people in to public service to our communities. We count on people to serve our communities. How are we going to do that when we tell the people who are willing to make sacrifices in the name of public service that it is illegal to talk to your employer about health insurance? It's illegal to talk about wages beyond just the base wage and a narrow range of increases. We have local governments that are rushing right now to enact new collective bargaining agreements with their workforce because they fear what this legislation will do. And we're doing it with an immediate impact. So they do have to rush to get these agreements reached with the workers that they value. Here's what local elected officials are telling me they want. They want to work through a system like the current Chapter 20 to ensure fairness in the process. A fair process that compels each side to be reasonable in their negotiations. A fair process that allows a neutral arbitrator to step in when the two sides can't come together and evaluate evidence to make sure the most reasonable proposal is enacted. This system was born out of reason and compromise and works out of reason and compromise. When we gut it, when we take away those protections, we create a work environment that is toxic. When we take away just cause for termination, you politicize the workplace. We have public employees looking over their shoulders, wanting to know, am I going to be next? Senator Schultz, you mentioned there won't be mass terminations and layoffs. There are going to be a lot of individual employees that are worrying about their personal employment future under this legislation. What it does is fixes the outcome. This is it. This is a fix in the system. We tell arbitrators what they consider. We tell local governments what they can talk to their workforce about. But we don't allow the workers a seat at the table. It's insulting to the intelligence of the workers of Iowa who are called to public service to tell them this is anything but what it actually is, a decimation of their rights in the workplace. I hear a lot of talk about how we have an influx of bad teachers in our state. I can tell you, we have a lot of good teachers in this state. We have a lot of good teachers who work long hours, who make incredible sacrifices for the students that they care about. And those good teachers are worried. Those good teachers are worried about what bad administrators may be able to do in politicized workforces. Teaching's hard enough when you're balancing increasing class sizes, shrinking funds, and now no one's going to have your back when somebody wants to blame you for a student's failure to perform. That's the reality. The protections are going to be gone. How are you going to recruit somebody to go into a rural Iowa school, tell them they're going to have no real voice on their wages, it's going to be illegal for them to talk about bargaining over insurance, and they're going to be at-will employees? They can be fired with no reason provided. Good luck finding the next generation of quality teachers who are going to educate our future workforce. One of the things that makes our economy run in Iowa is knowing we have the most educated, skilled, and productive workers in the nation right here. We can't claim that when we underfund education and we find ways to discourage people to go into the profession of teaching. This is bad public policy. It's bad public policy to blame the workers who sometimes put their lives on the line for our communities and make incredible sacrifices instead of really putting the blame where it belongs. We have inexplicably created budget crises for our school districts through failing to fund our schools. That's not the fault of the teacher who wants a fair hearing and a fair voice in the process. That's the fault of the legislature failing to live up to its sacred obligation to the future of our state. While I was out there running on expanding workers' rights, I don't remember hearing the counter-argument to that around the state. I don't remember hearing people out there saying we need to cut back on workplace protections. We need to whittle away benefits for workers. I didn't hear that contrasting message, but here it is. The real secret agenda that's been laid in front of us. And I say secret because we weren't even informed what was in this bill until last week. We're rushing to gut a working system without public input through a campaign, with limited public input through the legislative process, and here we are on the floor of the Iowa Senate taking up a major change to a piece of landmark legislation that has served our state since the 1970s. How about this? How about we accept this amendment and we go back to the drawing board and do something better for Iowa? Do something that is worthy of the citizens of this state who serve our communities in public service. Let's find ways to lift up wages across our state, private and public sector. Let's find ways to make sure we have quality health insurance accessible to our working families. Let's stop the rush to tear down and eliminate. Let's stop the rush to reduce the quality of life for Iowans and start finding ways to actually increase the quality of life for working Iowans. Let's be real. We do want the best and the brightest in our state to be the ones who are serving it. When Iowans need to make a call to 911, they want to know that they're talking to a reliable dispatcher on the other end of the line. When help comes in the form of a police officer or a firefighter, we want to know that person is there because they're the right person for the job, and they're qualified and skilled to provide that critical public service. When we dispatch an EMT to the scene, we want them to be the best possible for our loved ones who are in need of emergency care. We want well-qualified workers educating our children, securing our prisons, serving our public. We disrespect the sanctity of public service when we run through a bill with a rush process that diminishes their voice in determining the future of their profession and their immediate livelihoods. We need quality social workers serving our communities and protecting our most vulnerable children. These are public professions that we count on in our state. We need quality snowplow drivers. I agree, Senator Schultz. Snowplow drivers that have a role in public safety. When there's a snowstorm, emergency vehicles need to get through. Snowplow drivers do that. We need to have the best and brightest answering the call to serve our public. Our children know the value of public service. Ask them what they want to be when they grow up. Most of them are going to tell you, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a teacher. Why do they say that? They say it because they realize how important and valuable the public services provided by those professions are. They recognize the importance and the dignity of the work done by those workers. They see them as something to look up to. They respect them. They want to emulate them. It's also important to remember who our public service workers were before they became public service workers. A lot of them served our country and are veterans who have wanted to continue that service of public through serving their state and their community. We have a disproportionate number of veterans answering the call to serve our public. We dishonor their service by dishonoring their continued call to meet the needs of our public at home. Public safety professions, particularly police and fire, are symbolized by shields. Shields of protection. Their uniforms include those shields. They're an outward symbol of exactly what they do. They're designed to communicate to us that that firefighter, that police officer is here to protect our citizens from harm. The real harm that's being done is the harm that's done to the worker behind that shield in this legislation. We devalue that service. You can listen to the public workers who are showing up here. We've said that we have exempted police and fire from this legislation. They know that's not true. In the limited time that they have had to read this legislation, they understand that they are losing substantive rights, and they understand that the next time the legislature comes to take away more rights, they're first in line. That's the reality that's here. We have people that we need to protect because our communities count on these public servants. Think about the impact we are going to make to rural Iowa as rural schools struggle to recruit qualified teachers, as rural communities struggle to find the sheriff's deputies that they need to serve them. I'm not talking about rural Iowa figuratively. I'm someone who grew up in Columbus Junction. Senator Green, I'm sure you understand that community very well. You represent it now. It's a community of 2,000 people in a county of about 11,000 people. The citizens of that community want to know that their children will be taught by a qualified professional who wants to be there, that their sheriff's deputies are going to be recruited and attracted to the profession that they count on to keep their streets safe. They want to know that they're going to have qualified clerks in the courthouse. They want to know that the public employees who work there make a decent living and contribute to their community. And by the way, it's more than an economic contribution to the community. Think about what all our teachers do. Think about what all our public servants do as they teach Sunday school, as they volunteer for community fundraising drives, coach Little League teams. They're the lifeblood of small-town Iowa. And again, they're dishonored by this legislation. There's so much in this bill that is so incredibly harmful, but let's take a look at a few of those items. It's evident, by the way, that this legislation has been drafted without the input of the public workers who it affects the most directly. Let's look at what the one thing that is supposedly left after this decimation really is: the right to bargain over base wages. What does that mean? It certainly doesn't mean your actual wages, just the base wages of your profession. And you don't get a bargain freely over that topic. You're restricted. The best outcome you can have by going through to arbitration is the lesser of the Consumer Price Index, or 3%. We've seen the CPI get as high as 8%. Public service workers will be held back in those economic times and disadvantaged because they responded to the call to serve their public. Let's get into some of the meanness of this legislation. Senator Schultz talked about wanting to have fairer election processes. Fair elections. To get to the point where we can have a negotiation between employee organizations and the state or the county or the school board, they have to meet a threshold to get to the right to negotiate the limited topic they have left. And that threshold is they have to go through a certification election. But the fix is in on that system as well. Anyone who appreciates how democracy works should be offended by what this system does with the right to vote. Because in this bill, we are going to count someone who does not show up and vote as a vote no. We're actually going to take their vote and count it towards one side or the other. That's what this legislation does. Let me repeat that. Someone who doesn't vote has their vote counted anyway as a no vote. Let's make that concept real. Each one of us represents approximately 60,000 Iowans. Let's take a look at what the last election results would be under that standard. In Senate District 36, Senator Edler would have received only 38.9% of the eligible vote. Senate District 16, my election, I would have received 41.6% of the vote. Senate District 8, Senator Dawson, only 32.5% of the eligible vote. Senate District 7, Senator Bertrand, only 27.5% of the eligible vote. Senator Dotzler, unfortunately, 37.4% of the eligible vote. Those seats are empty if we apply the terms of an election from this bill to our own elections. That should be shocking to every one of us in this room, that we are going to take something as sacred as the basic casting of a ballot and twist it and turn it to make it do something that achieves a political agenda. That is wrong. To be clear, again, these things aren't modern concepts. They aren't tweaks to a system. I want to talk about really what this will mean to working families across this state for the next generation. I talked about my father and grandfather coming from union backgrounds. I also want to talk about my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, Lewis Pugh, immigrated to the United States from North Wales. He served his country in World War I. He was in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. And he came to America to seek out hope and opportunity, the promise that our country has made to the world for generations. Let's talk about the place he came from. In 1900, a major mine in North Wales forbade unions from collecting dues through the mine's payment process. The goal was pretty simple. They knew that if you had to go around to every individual miner's home all over the region, you wouldn't actually get to collect those dues. The goal was to eliminate the employee organization by breaking it. The move backfired. In that town, union membership went from a mere few hundred to nearly 2,000. It swelled because the workers saw what was happening to them. What followed was an increase in labor tension. Distrust grew in the community. For 3 years, those coal miners were on strike. It was one of the greatest and most significant labor incidents in British history. As the mine tried to break the union, they employed replacement workers. And striking miners put cards in their windows. Those cards said something. And I keep a replica of those cards right here on my desk. Those cards say, Nid o Spradur un ati Hune. There are no traitors in this house. It became a poisonous atmosphere for the economy of North Wales because it was clear one side was out to get the other side. These aren't modernizations or tweaks. There is a design in this legislation to plow salt in the fields and absolutely and completely destroy and decimate employee organizations from the ability to represent workers. We haven't heard much about those tweaks, but they are real. This bill and its impact on our communities will be historic. The debate we are having right now is about the very soul of our state. Whether we treat our public service employees with dignity, whether a first-class education is really an Iowa value, whether we want to make enhancing the quality of life for our citizens a real priority in the legislative process. Those are open questions. And now we're at the point of no return in terms of answering them. Make no mistake, each and every one of us stands on the threshold of history with this bill. Chapter 20's original enactment was historic, and history has judged the figures who stood up at that enactment well. Iowa's public sector bargaining laws have repeatedly been celebrated for the bipartisan accomplishment they were, bringing worker organizations and legislators on both sides of the aisle, together to do something to make our state stronger. What we are doing in this chamber undermines that. It is the exact opposite concept. This is a majority dictating to the minority. This is the state dictating to public employees and local governments. This is what we want to do. Deal with it. We've heard the outcry from the people who are affected by this. We've heard the outcry from the communities who will be affected by this. They do not want this legislation. They are standing up and they are speaking out. Will we listen? Will we give heed to the words being spoken to us by actual citizens who we represent? They're reaching out to us. They're reaching out with fear, but also with hope of what we can do at this moment in history. Let us not send a bad message about the value we place on those called to public service, who are willing to put in a hard day's work for the betterment of their community. We want the best and brightest, safeguarding our economy. We want them to continue to contribute to the future of our state. I urge you, I implore you, to take this opportunity on this amendment to stop this, to actually engage and listen and do something that honors the Iowans who serve our states, who serve our community, who want to do things to make Iowa a better place for the next generation of Iowans. We are at the point of no return. Please do what is right for the citizens of this state and the future of Iowa.